Welcome to next episode of The Wise Fools. Myself and Rory today leading the podcast with Jacob Young. I think you say Right Honourable Jacob Young MP.
Just honourable.
But is that right?
Yeah. Well, actually, in fairness, I'm just Jacob. So that's
okay.
Cool. You can call me that.
I always wondered about the Right Honourable, and if at some point they get to a certain point of no return where it becomes dishonourable, or
Well, it never becomes dishonourable, but you're only right honourable if you're a member of the Queen's Privy Council.
Right. Okay.
Which unfortunately not yet. I'm not yet there, so maybe someday.
That's probably another podcast as well to look at, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just for your information as well, Jacob, we this is a podcast. It's part of a campaign called Borough Man Can, which emerged in Middlesbrough as part of a men's health plan, trying to communicate and sort of to men locally. Basically, it starts off telling stories about men and their sort of life journeys when they've made improvements in their lives, to inspire other men to do the same, and it's sort of expanded more so. Often we end up talking about mental health because anyone's sort of health improvement journey often includes mental health as part of it.
Yeah.
So we do go into those areas. And Rory came on board as kind of he'd been in he told his story in the Evening Gazette, and I got in touch and has been involved in the podcast and some great ideas, including why don't we interview two local MPs from different factions of covering something of the Overton window, if you like, the local views. And it's there's a great idea, but Rory, you have a certain angle you wanted to bring in.
Yes, 100%. So obviously, not just even through the pandemic or the world in general is divisive. We know that, whether it's race, religion, politics, what have you. I'm sure you've seen the emails that I sent to Emily. We've got, for the most part, very differing political ideologies to yourself, but that doesn't matter. We're not here to have any political ambush. Obviously, some questions that we've got to ask as it pertains to mental health, but as pretentious and as maybe naive as it sounds, we want to bring people together. We don't want to further these divides of left, right, political.
Yeah. Well, health doesn't have a divide, does it?
No.
You don't have difficulties with your mental health just because you're a Conservative or because you're Labour or because you're Lib Dem.
Right.
And that's what we're going to get to.
Everyone faces similar challenges.
Mm-hmm. So in the past, we've interviewed footballers and rock stars, and we want to try and get to the unique challenges everybody faces behind closed doors, and we try and not see the difference. Mm-hmm. All that to say, we want to understand Jacob Young, the fella, not the MP, as it speaks. Obviously, you've got a certain responsibility about mental health questions, but we just want to get to know you.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm here for.
Cool. So my first question, got nothing to do with politics. What was the last gig you went to, or the last album you listened to?
The last gig I went to go and see Adele at Hyde Park.
Nice. BST.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. To be honest, I wouldn't go and see Adele in that same setting again. I really enjoyed myself.
Was it Adele or was it the setting?
It was the setting.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I've seen Adele previously perform, and she's just one of a kind. She's an amazing voice of our generation. But I think with Adele, you want to. It's almost like you want to connect with her.
Yeah, okay.
And that's very difficult to do in a that sort of festival time. Yeah. Whereas I know the Rolling Stones played the following day or the following days after that, and a few friends that went there, just like we're saying, how amazing they were and all this sort of stuff. And I can imagine myself really enjoying myself at a Rolling Stones gig in that sort of setting, because that's about community, isn't it? And we get it's the audience involvement in that. Whereas Adele, it's a bit more intimate, and I'm not sure it worked in that.
We've both been to festivals and gigs before and stuff, and I think it's just the difference. Like when you're at a festival, it's arms around people swaying in the sunlight. That's a different thing, but there's certain bands I want to see for the intimacy and the connection of it all.
Yeah, it's that energy, isn't it? I saw Adele was one of the artists when I went to the Brit Awards one year, and it was like
you went to the Brit Awards.
Yeah.
Cool.
What were you for? I wasn't up front. Yeah.
Were you at the one where she
full of shit award?
Where she sung that "Someone Like You," and that was that was what really took her off in a lot of ways.
I bawled my eyes out listening to that.
It was the second time at the Brits, so it was this. What was it? Third album? Was it 21? I think it was. It was the first time she performed the second album.
Yeah, it was 19 and then 21, I think, and then 25 and whatever the new one is.
It was the first time she performed a new song off that album live, basically. So it's quite a thing. Do you know what I mean? It's cool.
Yeah, I bawled my eyes out. Remember talking about that cataclysmic breakup a few years ago? Yeah, it was just after that. And my friend sent me it, and I was just like, it's not time. I'm too big for that.
Everything reminds me of her.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But music is evocative. I mean, we've talked about this. I know Matt wanted to do a podcast just about music.
Yeah.
And chat about how important it is for kind of, emotional release and kind of like evoking different thoughts and ideas as well. Mm-hmm. Is that part of it for you then as well? Or?
Yeah. I mean, to some extent. I love music. I love listening to music. And especially, as I say, with unique voices like Adele's, I really enjoy that. I don't often use music as part of my coping strategies with my mental health. I explore different avenues in that sense, but it certainly can speak to a lot of people, and as you've just outlined quite eloquently there, music means different things to all sorts of people in that moment.
You're not mindful of using it for something for your own, to keep you happy, or you don't put a song on going, do you know what, I'm in a bit of a shitty mood, I want to feel a bit better about something.
So I like, there's a few things that I like to do. One is I love listening to the waves.
Sure.
One of the things that I love to do is I wake up on a morning before the sunrise, go down to Saltburn and just sit on the pier, listen to the waves crash and watch the sunrise coming up. Yeah. I absolutely love that. It's part of the reason I love being a seaside MP, because I've got that luxury of having the seafront on my doorstep there. But also, I mean, for me, it's just I tune out. I listen to like Pavarotti and things like that because my granddad used to play that on his record player when I'd go around his house and that, and so it brings back those sorts of memories for me, and I love listening to stuff like that to sort of chill out and get back.
There is a thing about being my old man was just a massive fan of classical music, and I was like, what's this shit you're putting on? It's like some new opera, blah blah. But of course, it all stick in your mind, and eventually, I'm a big fan of film soundtracks, basically. I went to see the Royal Philharmonic in London. It's like one of the best nights. It was like movie nights. So it was like all the songs from the movie.
Which one was it you went to see? Because we went to see Jurassic Park.
Oh, it wasn't just one. It was like but the best one of the night was John Williams' theme from Schindler's List, and it was being played on a violin that was like like a Stratocaster is what they call it, and it was like Stradivarius, 500-year-old violin. It was just she'd been lent it for the evening, and amazing sound.
The Jurassic Park one was great.
Yeah,
was it the Royal Albert Hall?
It was.
Yeah, I saw Jurassic Park at the Town Hall in Borough with a live orchestra, and it was
great.
Class.
Yeah, we loved that. Obviously you're an MP, and obviously you by the nature of your job, you're in the public eye.
Yeah.
Permanently, essentially. You kind of don't really get a day off.
Yeah.
How does that affect your mental health, if at all? And if it doesn't affect your mental health, how does it not affect your mental health?
Well, I can't really imagine someone who could be in this job without it affecting their mental health in some way, because you are as an MP under constant pressure. You're faced with difficult choices all the time, and so I became an MP in December 2019. 3 months later, the government locked the country down. And I was in a position where me as an MP, having only been there 4 months, I have to vote on this legislation which says you must not leave your home. And that how can you as an individual who's only been in that role for 4 months take that decision lightly? So this role comes with constant stresses, constant pressures. And so, I can't imagine a single MP who hasn't faced a mental health difficulty in their role. For me, it's just about how you cope with those challenges you face, that you have the ability to disconnect sometimes and that you've got the right support network around you in that. I admit, I don't always get that right. And I find myself trapped in, sitting up at midnight, reading comments on my Facebook page, thinking how terrible a person I am and all that sort of stuff, and then I go to bed, wake up the next day, today's a new day, and I'm in a better place.
Is it hard to kind of distance yourself from that? If someone criticises you, I'd imagine. I mean, I'd imagine. I've seen it. Yeah. I've seen on your page, it gets personal.
Yeah,
really personal. Is that hard?
Yes, I think politics became quite personal about 12 years ago when. Well, actually, a little bit before that, but when we had the expenses scandal, and we were having a little chat about expenses before the podcast, there were we? And when we had the expenses scandal, and I mean, let's be frank, with politicians just taking the piss, and that then gave the public a reason to criticise them in a different way that they hadn't previously. And then since that, we've had some very divisive moments in British politics, whether that was Brexit, whether that was the pandemic that we've just gone through, that where politicians having to make difficult decisions that, members of the public don't necessarily get all the same facts as the politicians get, or, they just have a different point of view in principle anyway. And so politics has become very divisive, and it's kind of, we've opened Pandora's box to some extent, and I can't see it stepping away from that. And as I say, it is quite sad because it does get very personal.
Yeah.
And that's just what I have to deal with now.
It's tough, isn't it? I work in public health South Tees. I don't know if you're aware of that. And it's I actually work in a team which is mental health. So this is like where we set up this whole program. And so actually Borough and Cannes looking to set up a charity later on this year and separate out and start to do its own things, setting up men's health groups and so on. But it's some of the difficulties, even professionally myself during public health. I've been in trouble at work for questioning certain narratives that have emerged, because I've always been taught and trained to look at the evidence base and the solid evidence base, and even like kind of the nature of peer-reviewed evidence itself can be subverted by a pharmaceutical company who funded that research, and actually their only aim, whether they've got evil intentions or not, or what people want to think about that, their aim is to make as many profits as they can for their shareholders. So that gears all their decisions, doesn't it? Yeah. And so it's been difficult in sort of saying, well, is that cherry-picked research? Is this cherry-picked research? So in terms of being divisive, it's been an incredibly difficult time just to work in that area and sort of see those decisions going, I really strongly disagree with some of these decisions. Yeah. Because, and I, just to expand on that a bit further, it's a case of public health is very much about social determinants of health, many different vectors that consider what those outcomes are best to do. So when you're saying about making difficult decisions, it's difficult because it's complex and it's got a range of different effects to one element. Whereas it's felt like during the pandemic, it was like, look, we've got to stop COVID, basically. And it was like, that's all that mattered. And I remember seeing an impact assessment prior to the first lockdown, which suggested 200,000 excess deaths over 10 years if lockdowns went ahead. And that's actually been revised up now since the pandemic. And that's obviously not just mental health, but a whole range, delays in access to healthcare and so on. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, and I spoke out about some of these challenges in debates in the House of Commons around mental health, because I like you just said there, you could see this tsunami coming towards us if we continued on the trajectory that we were going, and even to the extent where we had our region was being put into tier 4, North Yorkshire was in tier 2, and and you were thinking, how are we drawing these dividing lines? How are we getting the data that supports like that? Actually, this is the reality, and it was constant conflict, both personally and politically, because as well, all of us have our own stories in this too. I lost my granddad quite early on in the first lockdown, which was incredibly difficult for me and for my family, because back then we couldn't go along to funerals. Well, 10 of us could go along to the funeral and that, and so I had a position on what I felt lockdowns were like, versus other people who had grandparents who were shielding, and so they might have wanted us to keep.
When you say other people, do you mean like other York?
Other MPs. They knew constituents who were shielding, and they wanted to protect them in certain ways. Other constituents who have the much younger constituencies, they wanted it to be much more relaxed, and so it was, as I say, it was a constant challenge. And you're put in that position. You have to make those decisions, and it's the pressure and the stress that comes with that.
Is that ideological? Like, I mean, we talked about different political ideologies and so on. And actually, like my take, and I think Rory's probably as well, and it might be the same for you. is that one of the problems with ideology, of course, is that sometimes you're having to toe a line of something you might disagree with. And I don't want to put words in your mouth by any means, but that is a problem. And I think for us as a member of the public, and frankly, I would vote for any party who I thought I agreed with the most. I'm not really, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I do. So I think, to be honest, to some extent, ideology was mostly out the window during COVID, because actually, we were there being given the information by the scientists and the medical teams who said, if we don't do X, Y will happen. And so we had to act on those decisions. My own ideology stems from personal responsibility. That's why I'm a conservative. That actually, I think individuals are there to make decisions for themselves, and they're the best person to make those decisions. So if I was doing this from an ideological point of view, I would have loved to have the lockdown rules say, this is what we suggest, but actually you guys are there to set your own parameters in this. But ultimately, during COVID, it was, we're faced with the facts that are being presented by scientists and medical professionals, and we don't really have a choice to divert from those.
Yeah. I would say scientists, like whether it's your Chris Whitty and so on, but there was a whole, like from a public health point of view, there was a whole other range of science going on there.
Yeah.
Which is, and this, I don't know what your thoughts are in terms of censorship. First of all, I mean, personal responsibility includes whether or not you decide to put your opinions out there in the world, and any consequences that may fall from you expressing those. Yeah. And it's, we were talking about Twitter, weren't we, and social media, and not just to do with the pandemic actually, but to do with the whole range of different rights issues and so on. Yeah. Private kind of firms like that who have the right to decide who can use their platform, but is it right to do that? In terms of subjugating the conversation.
It's a tricky thing. I think, like we said, people like Katie Hopkins and Piers Morgan, just irrespective of ideology, I just don't like them as people. But they were silenced, and I didn't agree with them being silenced. Because what happens if somebody gets into power that disagrees with me? The precedent is worth more than that supposed new silence. But one of the things I want to ask you is, how do you weigh up and how do you reconcile yourself with the conflict of weighing up what's best for Redcar if what's best for Redcar opposes what's best for the country? That's got to be a really tough situation.
Well, it is, because at the end of the day, I'm a member of the Parliament of the United Kingdom. I'm there elected by the people of Redcar, but I'm there to make decisions for the country. That is my job. And so it's constant conflict because for me, it's not. I don't say it's just Redcar. Like, I'm a Teessider. That's born and bred in Borough, lived here my whole life. And so for me, constantly my focus is how do we improve Teesside? How do we improve Teesside? And so I weigh that up all the time with my responsibilities as a member of Parliament, looking at national and international issues. But that's why I get involved in projects locally as well, and it's why I've been pleased to support Walk and Talk programme and things like that with Gareth and other people, because actually, if an MP isn't rooted in their constituency, in their home area, then that's where the disconnect begins to start, and that's where we end up in situations like we have previously.
Yeah, and I think maybe my intro sounded a bit more serious and full on than it was supposed to, but like me and Richie have different political ideologies. I'm sure me and Gareth do. I'm sure you and Gareth do. But just as much as you're a servant of Redcar in the area, we are too. Like, we want what's best for the area, and if that means putting all that to one side, that's exactly what we'll do.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned about personal responsibility. I feel personal responsibility is about half of the argument for health, full stop. Often when we're doing like health campaigns, it's actually encouraging people to make certain behavioural choices. I'm sure you're aware of the behavioural nudge team, and like kind of the and how that was used, and obviously the criticism to that that exists out there.
What's the behavioural nudge?
Well, I've
never heard of that.
It's to do with
like an initiative to get people to look after themselves as opposed to. It's how
messaging is used to inspire like change in behaviour within the population level. So it's been used very successfully for smoking, which is admirable. I mean, at the end of the day, who doesn't? We've seen like almost a 40% reduction in Middlesbrough since I started when I was in the NHS, and that was like 2007. The ban came in, but the messaging, you see the fag packets with the photographs, that was used in the pandemic in different ways as well. It's been used for the vaccination program and so on. And it's only the first time it's actually been criticised, but that's how it is actually used.
Yeah.
But a lot of what I'm trying to say is a lot of the messages are put across as personal responsibility, choices you make, and trying to say these are the consequences of the choices you make. So it's still saying it's about people's choice.
But it's like we've discussed 1,000 times. Obviously, you suffered with your mental health quite severely. I've suffered with mental health quite severely. There's people that say, "Oh, you can get yourself out of it. It's all on you." I think that's half the story. I think sometimes you can get yourself out of it, and there's no better way to break free of the mental illness, so to speak, than taking things under your own power.
That's right.
But to say it's all up to you is
I think the reality is, that everyone faces different challenges. Everyone copes with those challenges in different ways. Mm-hmm. We've just had a conversation earlier on about the fact that I like listening to the waves, and that's how that's how I get into a better state of mind. You might want to sit there and listen to Adele. That's up to you. Do you know what I mean? And so I think it's wrong to sort of cast people in a certain die and say, you know what, like you have to do this for yourself. You have to get yourself out of this position or whatever. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, some people are able to do that. Some people, they've got the tools that they can use to help them out. Other people need support from their peers. People need the support from their family, etc. It's not a one size fits all, and we just have to be open to actually how do we help people in their need, not this is how I'm going to make you help yourself.
Mm-hmm. Of course, yeah.
What would be your view on, in terms of kind of how much does health figure into your priorities as an MP for Redcar? So bearing in mind that we've got, I'm asking that in the context that we've got some of the wards we've got are in the lowest 10% of in terms of deprivation. When we talk about social determinants of health, we talk about health inequalities, don't we? Which isn't just like the gaps between like kind of the north and the south, it's local wards as well. Mm. But we've seen inequality get worse. We've seen life expectancy stall in terms of kind of like its constant improvement since 1900. Mm-hmm. And that's happened in the last 10 to 15 years under the tenureship of this current government. Now, I wouldn't ever lay entirely all the blame because, again, there's a whole mixture of factors. But how much does that factor in your thinking as an MP?
Well, so I speak to constituents daily. My team here speak to constituents daily. It's rare that a week will go by where we haven't encountered someone who's going through a severe mental health challenge. Mm-hmm. And so, having the services there to direct them to is really important. And one of the things that's been an eye-opener for me is since coming into this role is that some of those services just don't work properly. And we've had fantastic charities set up over recent times, and we mentioned Walk and Talk earlier on with what Gareth does there, but other local charities as well, like the Link Charitable Trust, etc., mm-hmm. who help people in those points. And for me, it's about having the right people to forward people onto, because my role as an MP and my team here, they're here to support people, mm-hmm. but we're not professionally trained to help people with challenges that they're facing in that situation.
On that, sorry, how thankless is that task though? Because for every person you may help, there may be 20 who you can't help. Yeah. And is it a case of it? I saw someone on one of your comments earlier, it was either today or yesterday, say, thank you so much for sorting out X, Y, and Z. Mm. Does that become thankless because other people say, well, you couldn't do this, you didn't do that?
Well, in truth, I think we do quite well. We have quite a good success rate on helping people because at the end of the day, we don't have a pot of money. We're not a function in that sense. We don't have responsibility for housing or benefits or anything like that. But we can put people in touch with the right people who can sort the things for them. And I've got 2 letters after my name, MP, which means that actually when I call someone up, they answer the phone, or when I write them an email, they click open straight away. Yeah. And that opens doors for people that were otherwise closed. So we are able to help a lot of people, and it's the best part of this job, to be honest. When we talk about the difficulties that I face on social media and all that sort of stuff, actually the reward is we send these letters out to people when we've helped them. And I come in on a Friday at the end of what sometimes has been a naff week, you know, like the last couple of weeks where we've been dealing with the psychodrama in Westminster. Come home on a Friday, come into the office, and my team have got a pile of letters there for me ready to sign, to say, you know, I'm really pleased we were able to help you with X or Y or Z. And some of it, like in recent times, you know, lots of people have struggled to get the passports and things like that, and we've been able to.
I think it's a passport thing that I actually saw.
Yeah, we've been able to help a lot of people with that recently, and you know, in credit to my predecessor when she was Anna Turley, when she was in post, lots of people were facing challenges with PIP claims, and she was able to get a lot of people money back through the schemes that they were the challenges that they were facing there. Again, because she had those letters after her name, and so that, as I say, that is the privilege of being an MP, is being able to help people every day. And you might not get every one of them over the line, but actually, you know, I'm really pleased with all the amount of people that we are able to help.
For sure, yeah.
So just back to in terms of inequalities, because it's there was the 10-year review of the Marmot report, which basically made the point that over the 10 years that's what it was saying, that there hadn't been any increase in health inequalities. Male health is implicated in there as well, because the gap in male health is significant in terms of like.
In what way?
Well, males are often diagnosed later with issues. They present earlier, so they spend more years of life in
psychological issues or any issues.
Whole range of health issues. Yeah.
Is that the toxic masculinity thing, where you're not supposed to go to the doctor and men just stiff up a lip on all that nonsense?
No, you know my thoughts on the term toxic masculinity.
Well, no, you know what I mean, but like
no, I do.
That kind of thing. Is it a case of have they figured out why that is?
There's a whole range of reasons. Yeah, okay. I mean, one of them definitely is the fact that kind of men don't access. They're not as
forthcoming.
Yeah, well, some evidence suggests that some health services are more feminized, ultimately because more women access them, so they're actually naturally evolved that way. And then actually, it could be the masculine trait of kind of manning up until you seek support. The other thing is there isn't as many reasons for men to engage with health, but it's not just. I mean, that's the men's health element. Health inequality is serious. We're talking about kind of life expectancy, and like the worst area is not seeing any improvement. And this is one of the areas, and it's like your Conservative MP in an area that's traditionally been part of this red wall that's been described in the media so many times. It's like what is your take as one MP amongst 500 plus, you know, to try and make a difference and get your fight, you know, get the investment up here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so some of the things that I want to see the government do differently is to devolve more powers on health. So we've got the Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchin. You know, in other areas, health is a devolved issue.
Absolutely.
And so they can focus the priorities of their area on increasing, you know, the awareness and that. And you've talked about the health inequalities we face here. I think what would be a really helpful thing to do in that was to devolve certain health priorities to our combined authority, so that they can direct the money actually where it needs to go, and it doesn't end up in this much larger pot elsewhere. But so I think that's one step we can take forward. The other thing is I've been working on a campaign with a few other MPs as well, cross party, looking at how we can get mental health nurses in every GP surgery in the country, because huge. Well, I think
referral times are wild.
Well, and one of the challenges, I think there was a mad statistic, and I might not get it right, but I'm going to say this anyway, and someone will tell me it's the wrong thing. But it was something like 50% of GP appointments last year involved mental health. And yet, in every GP surgery, there isn't currently a mental health nurse. And there's been pilots around the country. I think we had a pilot here in Teesside. And actually, I think I'd love to see that rolled out nationwide, because that's how ultimately we'll get people the help they need quicker.
I never even thought of that as an option. That's great.
We've got our local mental health trust going through adult transformation, basically, which is sort of we'll transform the whole approach so that someone doesn't get, there's no wrong door approach and people don't have to retell their story many times over. You've actually got mental health and wellbeing coaches in GPs who these PCNs locally have commissioned them. And actually, when they're recruiting for those roles, it was actually lived experience was a desirable part of the recruitment process. So they're recognising that having someone enroll who's had those experiences fast tracks someone's support because they open up faster and so on.
Well, let's be honest.
That's very, very strong evidence for men as well.
Of course. And then people like me, I wouldn't have set up Find the Light if it wasn't for my troubles with mental health, and Gareth wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for his troubles with mental health. And do you know what I mean? I think that's a huge factor, an enormous, great factor.
Yeah. But I mean, I think the other thing is as well, actually, in organisations, that we should have mental health first aiders in organisations as well. And I was privileged before I became an MP to work for a company called SABIC on Teesside.
I used to work in SABIC.
Oh, there you go.
Men's health toolbox talks.
Yeah, and so I had a guy called Tony, who sadly passed away now, but he was one of our local mental health first aiders, and a guy called Mick as well, where I worked. And actually just Mick Durden.
I trained Mick Durden.
Oh, there you go.
I know
See,
Mick Durden very well.
And so having that, having those people around you who you know you could go and have a chat to, and you know things would be confidential.
Absolutely.
But actually, and it didn't feel formal. You were just sort of chatting to one of your work colleagues.
Yeah.
And it just, I think that broke down some of the barriers. And I'd love to see that, you know, be incorporated into some sort of legislation, where at the moment there's legislation that requires organisations to have first aiders. You know, why isn't there a supplementary to that? I say, you know, either your first aider should also be a mental health first aider, or you should have an additional mental health first aider along that.
Sure,
And I
is
think
there anything like that in Parliament? Okay. Obviously, we've in public health England, I presume you've got mental health kind of groups or things to help you in your job.
So for the staff well-being.
Yeah. And I have in my company. Is there anything like that for you guys?
Well, there is. I've been working with a couple of MPs who were interested in this topic on mental health, and it was principally Conservative MPs. We called ourselves the Churchill Network, because Churchill famously struggled with a lot of mental health.
Black dog, Churchill's black dog.
Yeah, and so we started something like that during the pandemic. It sort of came like fizzled out a little bit now, but I think going back to things like that would be really helpful for us. And as I say, we're in a privileged position in Parliament because we have the support services around us to do that. But I know, as I say, in other organisations where they don't currently have mental health first aiders, it'd be fantastic to see that.
That's exactly why I wanted to do this podcast the way we're doing, because oftentimes, irrespective of your ideology, oftentimes people would see people like you as a function and not as a person, and just waylay all of their crap onto you and all of their fears and insecurities and all of their needs and that.
Right.
Awful.
This is lovely, and it's not even fluffy. Mental health first aid is well evidenced, and there's first aid for mental health and other courses as well. It's ultimately about getting rid of the stigma so people can talk about it, be more comfortable about it, and we're all about that 100%. And it doesn't strip men of like masculinity, to do that. In fact, if anything, it's courageous, it's a strength. Wouldn't you agree? Well,
absolutely.
That's exactly why I'm so open honest about crying at Adele songs. To look at me, I'm a 36-year-old, 6'2", 300-pound tattooed skinhead northern man.
Viking.
I shouldn't cry.
With Viking.
It was beaten out of me in my youth. I shouldn't cry, but of course I am.
Yeah.
But going back to what we were saying about the struggles you face. Obviously, and you did the Psycho Times in Westminster.
Psycho Times in Westminster.
I used that phrase.
Jake was not me. I didn't say it. Kind of fits.
True.
Last 2 weeks, it felt like a psycho drama.
I'm not responsible for Richie's actions just as much as you're not responsible for mine. How much pressure, again, without political ideology coming into it, how much pressure has what's been going on with Boris Johnson and the Partygate and millionaire MPs, billionaire MPs, like whatever. Like, how much pressure does that put on you to defend those people, even though it's got nothing to do with you?
Well, to some extent, it does have to do with me, because at the end of the day, if Boris Johnson's the leader of my political party, is the Prime Minister of the country, so it does have something to do with me. And I'm in a position there where you have to, as we talked about earlier on in the pandemic, you weigh up the evidence. You weigh up, actually, this is how I feel about an issue. This is what the consequences of the issue would be if we took it that route or that route or that route. And for me, I go back to that point that I said about Teesside earlier on. I love this area. I want to stand up for this area as much as I can. Boris Johnson, when he was Prime Minister, visited this area more than any Prime Minister I remember, and Tony Blair was only up the road, so and still I think we've got to remember in the Tees Valley, we had Peter Manderson in Hartlepool, Alan Milburn, who was a former health secretary in Darlington. We had Tony Blair, as I say, in Sedgefield. We had Mo Mowlam here. We were the political centre of the world, and yet I feel as though we weren't getting focus previously. Under Boris Johnson, I felt as though we were finally getting focus, and we were getting a slice of the pie. So for me, like, I was there in a position where I was like, well, actually, what do I think's best for Teesside? And keeping Boris Johnson there, I felt was best for Teesside. Now, everyone has a straw that breaks the camel's back, and that happened for me last Wednesday. That's why I resigned from my position in government, because I at that point I was like, well, actually, we're getting to a point here where the situations that were affecting Downing Street and the decisions that the Prime Minister was making were becoming a distraction from what I feel were fantastic things that we were doing in the country. And so you're put in that position where you have to choose, do you stick with what you've got, or do you make a change, and what's that impact going to be? And that's the decisions I have to weigh up.
Okay. When you say you resigned from government, what does that technically mean in terms of your tenure as MP?
So it doesn't mean anything in terms of my tenure as an MP, but so I had a junior ministerial role in government, which is known as a parliamentary private secretary. So I was working closely with Michael Gove in the Department for Levelling Up, which, as it's clear that's needed on Teesside and the work that's been going on here. And so I was on the, I suppose, the very lowest rung of the ministerial ladder. But for me, I was more than happy to do that role during my time there. We worked on some key legislation like the Building Safety Act, like the Fire Safety Act, which we were implementing some of the consequences of the Grenfell inquiry and actually making sure that buildings were safer going forward and we wouldn't have a repeat of that incident. And working on the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill and the amazing changes that's going to have on our ability to, that'll help us devolve some further powers, like I said, about mental health, etc.
I mean, I'm all for devolved power. I'm not sure that kind of it actually necessarily, what the examples we've seen so far necessarily bring people closer to the decisions, to the power structures, basically. I mean, it's where you do see decentralisation of power. That's a different thing to devolution of power. It's usually a case of setting up within a region rather than actually right into the communities as well. I think there's a question I've got here, which is about, I read some studies about the impact of politics and exposure and interaction of the public with politics, either like directly or through media. And I have a genuine concern in terms of mental health, that kind of the state of the lack of kindness that the people you observe in British politics, the state of how divided we are as a nation, like you said, you gave the examples earlier on, and the general narrative, the sort of discourse of politics, often is so. The often thought about politicians is that you ask a question, they toe the party line with their answer, and often might not actually answer the question or get behind it. And obviously, the nature of politics at the moment feels like it has been under Boris, demonstrably kind of lie after lie after lie, and actually that's actually become the norm, like accepting kind of almost like a populist sort of right-wing sort of populist approach. And I worry about the nature of that in terms of people feeling like anything is ever going to be any better. Yeah, genuinely. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I think why Rory was keen to do this, is to go, look, we need to kind of like be approaching this from a certain angle, which is like we do the Joe Cox quote, we have more in common than that which divides us. Yeah. And if we genuinely are, I mean, I'm not sure I personally trust politics full stop anymore. Yeah. Like, I'm not sure whether or not I think going to the voting thing is actually helping, making things is improving those things. Because I'm well aware of, having reading books about how power works and how influences of kind of, more powerful figures, private sector, corporations, things like that. And actually, how does that figure into Redcar? Do you mean, other than investment and people setting up business here? Really, are those decisions here?
Yeah,
really?
I mean, so there's a few points there. So on devolution, I think bringing decisions and decision making closer to where those decisions are implemented, I think is really important, and that's why I think since we got the Tees Valley Mayor, and that could have been whether it was Conservative or Labour, actually. Effective decisions have been allowed to be made for our region, and we've seen the regeneration of the former steelworks site simply because we have a combined authority and a Tees Valley mayor. And as I say, that could have been whether or not it was Conservative or Labour. A regeneration would have happened there, and because those decisions are being made closer to home. So I think that's a key point, and that's the reason why I support devolution in that way.
I've written to my MP many times, and what I usually get back is like a standard response that doesn't address like individual points I've made. And that's the kind of the point I'm saying is even when you engage, this is just my own personal experience, and I'm in Gisborough, so it's Simon Clark. And all I ever got was standard response. It didn't address the points I was making. And I understand you might say about time and so on, but people want to feel and see, I think, in politics that a more wider. I talk about the Overton window and actually a wider set of opinions, thoughts, examples are given and discussed and recognised.
Well, I understand that, and I understand your frustrations in that sense. I would say that like as an MP, I represent 68,000 people, and so actually, if 68,000 people send me an email, then it's going to take you some time to get through them all. And that we're in the position we're in because of the changing nature of an MP's job. Go back 50 years ago, we talked about Churchill earlier on. Churchill represented a constituency in Scotland, and I think he visited there probably 2 or 3 times. Whereas
there's no high-speed rail at that point.
But it used to be like the brass band had come out for the MP's annual visit to the constituency, whereas actually now you've got MPs who are deeply involved in their constituency, who want to be involved in local projects, want to help people with the issues that they face, whereas previously, actually, so if someone got in touch with me about a pothole or whatever, I would try and solve the pothole issue for them. That's not the job of an MP. That really is down to your local councillor, etc. But I'd still try and solve the pothole for them because actually I'm bothered about the local area. And so that's and when you're faced with the fact of you've got the fact that you want to try and help people in the best way you can, plus you've got many people trying to get in touch with you about and express their view on policy, and wanting a response, then sometimes you can end up in that situation.
I'd rather have a cold solution than a warm failure. It's got to be said.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I read the emails that come into my inbox. I got them all on before, and sometimes I wish I didn't have them on before, because as I say, I stay up at midnight reading them before bed.
That thing yesterday with
you learn more from your critics than you do sometimes for those who just yes men.
I think it's a very fine balance, though. If, and I know you wouldn't have a problem if for whatever reason you and I got together and had a drink after this, and we talk actually about politics and the merits for either way, we could get into a really spirited, good, hopefully healthy discussion. But I think the people that yell at you in the street, although they've got to be responsible for their own actions, they're victims of the media just as much as you might be a victim of them, maybe, I guess. Yeah,
but I also think, there's an element where I think it's wrong to judge people's assertions in what they're doing. So, I was on Nigel Farage's programme because he came to Redcar yesterday. I sat and had a conversation with Nigel Farage in front of 150 of my constituents in the Workies pub. And I was called a fascist because I sat and had a conversation with Nigel Farage on his TV show.
And I'd imagine we'll get stick for this.
I just think, how does that make me a fascist? Did you even listen to the conversation that I had with him? Did you listen to the points that I made? Are you bothered in understanding the reasons why I hold the political opinions that I do? Or are you just going to shout me down? And if all you're going to do is shout me down, then you only contribute to that further toxic 100%. Culture in politics.
And I think that's my main problem with this whole, the political, especially around the media, the political climate is that if you're left wing, you're a communist. If you're right wing, you're a Nazi. All of the grey in between gets lost. There's no common discourse anymore.
Which is most people.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything is, you can't just be, if it's a spectrum, you can't just be here or there. You're either over here or you're over there. There's no middle ground to come together anymore. It's a real shame. Proper shame.
The whole issue of mental health is, I said I've worked in health for nearly 20 years. And this mental health team in public health for nearly 10 years, and I've been workplace health and been doing men's health for 15. And it's like we're at a point now where we understand that mental health is obviously often an expression of symptoms. People experiencing negative cognitive symptoms, basically. But there's the causes of them. A lot of things. I mean, we're talking about, what is it, 15 years of Conservative government now, since it handed over 2007, 2008. Yeah. And obviously that we came off the back of the financial crisis, bailing out the banks. It'd be interesting whether or not that would be exactly the same now. We've had Brexit, which is potentially a response to lots of other unrest. But it would be completely remiss to say that, look, there's other policies that have come from government over those 10 years, or a lack of things like a health inequalities strategy, for example, that government have done that have actually caused a lot of the issues, whether it's to do with social determinants. And so, how on earth do we kind of have that conversation about going, right? Well, if you don't have transparency, I don't think you have fair politics. And I think that's it. You said yourself, there's some things.
We're here to have a conversation. I don't want to go into trying to justify the government's actions, etc., etc. We touched on the financial crash and the fact that the then Labour government had to bail out the banks.
Yep.
And people criticise them for bailing out the banks. But actually, if they hadn't bailed out the banks, no one would have been able to get any money out of the banks. And then it's a round circle in that. And,
are you saying the Tory government would probably have done the same?
Yeah, but
that wasn't the way it was sold at the time, was it? Yeah. It's good of you to say that.
I mean, as I say, the reality is, you have to do what you do in those circumstances, and then following that, as you rightly said, there we had the financial crash, and the responsibility then to rebuild the country's finances, and over that period, health funding was ring fenced. When other departments faced large cuts to departments like the Home Office, for example, we lost a lot of our police officers in that period. Thankfully reversing some of those changes now, but we lost a lot of police officers in that period. Mm-hmm. Health funding was ring fenced because actually we recognise that's that is a priority for the nation, come what may, and that's still the number one priority for people.
It was reduced though. Not from a debate, but it was ring fenced, absolutely, and that protected the investment, but the investment was reduced over time as well. So in terms for public health part, it was ring fenced, which gave us the protections going forward for planning, but it was in a reduction model as well.
I don't have statistics in front of me to dispute that. But my understanding is that we protected health spending throughout that period because, as I say, it remains the number one priority for people. But actually, we have to recognise that situations have changed. Mm-hmm. The fact that there's lots of people living longer now. The fact that actually, what used to 50 years ago, someone would have died of cancer. Mm-hmm. Now we've got the interventions that we can make to try and extend their life and potentially even, prolong their life indefinitely, for want of a better word. And so actually, we're now in a position where a lot of medicines are a lot more expensive and that. So, but we have to recognise the challenges that we still face in mental health. We have to give mental health the same parity as we do for physical health as well, because those challenges manifest themselves in all sorts of ways.
Absolutely. Totally 100% agree with that.
Yeah, one of the in terms of parity between physical and mental health, one of the things I've always struggled with, I don't know about you, when I'm physically low, I get mentally low, but moreover, when I'm mentally low, my immune system tanks. So I think mental health and physical health shouldn't just be two silos. They're one and the same thing eventually. I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, it's when you look at the causes, when you look at the reasons why. And so with the awareness of mental health first, we interviewed a GP, and she said when most people present in her surgery, they're either asking for a sick note or antidepressants. And so there was no consideration of including counselling and then a whole range of other things which they could undertake in their life. And so there's things like social prescribing going on where, get active on prescription and all these kind of activities that make sense for lower level mental health issues, when it's mild to moderate, that kind of works. And when you look at how much money is spent on prevention, that's a real difficult one because you can't then turn around, can you, and say, well, we're not going to treat people. Yeah. But actually, if we didn't have to spend as much money on treating people, we'd be able to invest more in prevention. Whenever you speak to your average Joe on the street, they're like, just spend more money on prevention.
I think the climate's changing. Like, obviously, I can only speak for myself. My mental health tanked when I was about 19, a bit of a tumultuous home life and whatever else. And if somebody had actually took me for a hike when I was 19, as weird as it sounds, if someone introduced that kind of thing to my life when I was 19, I'd never be on on medication. I never would have touched it. And maybe I do need it, maybe I don't, who knows.
You need transport, you'd need boots, you need access to those basic things.
Yeah, but even just the knowledge of those things got maligned for so long because it was hippy dippy, it was airy fairy. How can it help? But it really does. And if somebody had just even taught me that, just go for a walk down the beach. Because I lived on the seafront in Saltburn. Just go for a walk down the beach. It'll make you feel a little bit better for the amount of time that you're doing it.
Did you see Martin Lewis's video that he put out yesterday, the 10-minute
video?
Yeah, I did, He'd been to the... Have you seen this, Jacob?
No. So
I can share it with you afterwards if you want to have a look. But it's basically Martin Lewis. He's usually quite a calm person. And he had a meeting with Ofgem. And he was apologising partly because he'd sworn and got really frustrated with them. What's Ofgem? Are they independent?
Yeah, they're the regulator for the energy market.
So they're independent regulator. And his criticism was actually that they've become quite unindependent in terms of, if that's the right word, but basically that they very clearly they've favoured decisions that are profitable to the big six rather than what's best for the consumer, and he's lost it basically. And what he's saying, he's warning about sort of September and then April, and potentially up to kind of like £3,000 bills a year for people that are coming. So we're talking about cost of living, the sort of crisis, and it's terrifying me. It must terrify you in terms of like kind of how that would affect an area here. Yeah. What do you make of that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they're the challenges that people face today, aren't they? Whether or not they're going to pay for heating or eating and things like that, and to have those sort of decisions being made in 21st century Britain, we wouldn't think that we would be in this position. And the reality is, we're in this position because of a whole host of reasons, mostly completely out of our control, like the situation in Eastern Europe, the global inflation because of what happened during the pandemic, where money was pumped into the system through things like furlough and things like that, but abroad as well. And so we're facing all of these challenges at home. And, I think all the government can do in that instance is try and help in the ways possible. And we've seen that through some of the targeted interventions in terms of the cost of living payments and council tax rebates and things like that. But to go back to the physical manifestations of mental health challenges, the classic for me is the first time I really felt in a difficult position with my mental health was back in 2015, where my parents for a time separated, and I ended up on this downward spiral where I inflated myself to 17 stone. I developed this really unhealthy relationship with food, and I always laugh and tell people, "Oh yeah, I yo-yo in my weight and stuff like that." It was actually, what's happening is I yo-yo with where I am in terms of my mental health and whether or not I'm in a good place or a bad place. And you might have realised some of my shirts are a bit tight at the moment.
That's why I wear 3X shirts. That's all.
Wear a bigger shirt.
Yeah, and that's that's the same for a lot of people. They find that difficult, and as I say, I'm in a position where I've got the support networks around me to help me in that. But it's difficult for people.
Yeah, I think we're about at the end of our time. Thank you so much, Jacob. I truly appreciate it. I also struggle with food is my vice. I don't smoke, I don't drink, so my mental health tanks, it's always food. What's your vice in terms of food? Is it Parmos? Is it ice cream? What kind of ice cream?
The thing is, one of the reasons why it's food for me is because I get into a place where I cannot be bothered to look after myself. I cannot be bothered to cook. I can't, and that. So then I'm on the phone to the takeaway, or I'm nipping around to the co-op to get a couple of pot noodles. Because I literally I'm in that state of mind where I just can't be bothered. And that's where my vice is. But yeah, definitely in Parmo. I can't come on a podcast without mentioning a lemon top. So
well, yeah.
Before you abandon all, just one if we abandoned all ideologies, like let's set that aside and said if there was one thing, magic wand moment that you would do to sort of improve the health locally, what do you think would be like the best policy that could happen?
I think we'll
stop eating as much palm oil.
No, well, I think two things. Firstly, a mental health nurse in every GP surgery, and secondly, a mental health first aider in every organisation.
Okay, I think both those would help. I just think when you've got so one of the things about men is that they don't go to GPs, and actually 80% of suicides aren't even known to services.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I think it's important, you know, that you have these systems in the workplace because, you know, for me, you know, knowing that I could go and have a chat with one of the lads, and you know, especially at 2:00 in the morning in the night shift when you've got nothing else better to do. Yeah. So just have a conversation with someone about what's going on, where's your head at. I think that's so important, and bringing that you know to the workplace where people can engage rather than feeling as though they have to go to a GP. I think is a really great idea.
Just for like so many sole traders, aren't there? It's like I think a lot of work we're trying to do is get more blokes to engage with it earlier. Simple as that. And I think that is where something like mental health nurses would help because clearly there's a capacity issue. So it'd be like, you know, to have that would be wonderful. If that's the direction of things.
Yeah, I think so.
Jacob, we do appreciate your time and your answers. Hopefully we can come back to you at some point in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Revisit some of these issues as well. But other than that, is there anything you want to ask us before we finish?
There's now I want to ask you, but I do also want to just praise the work that Walk and Talk do. As I say, you know, I've been on a few of the walks myself and chatting to some of the guys there. I think it's a fantastic group that we've got set up in Redcar, and it's a really good organisation for people to get plugged into.
Good effort, and they're doing like a Tuesday morning beach, and with they all meet up on the beach. About 60 odd of them now as well. Do like
massive groups of people. Yeah, that's
meditation.
Not Walk and Talk. It's Gareth that's doing it. But
he's there, but there's another guy who's actually running it. Yeah.
Okay.
As well.
I'm not doing that like 6 a.m. beach tips. Not for me.
That's the next. That's when we come back to you. We'll convince you.
If they can delay the sunrise to about 11, I'll be all right.
You have to wait for the right time, but then the water's colder. So what do you want to do? Do you know what I mean? It's a balance.
But yeah, Jacob, thank you so much. We really do appreciate it, and thank you for being open with us and honest with us. And hopefully we'll do this again in the future.
More of it. Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.